If you don't know by now, I basically created a podcast to share the most amazing people in my life that really have had a major influence on who I am today. And my friend Katie Quesada is no different. From the first moment we met in that laundry room 13 years ago, I felt a deep connection with her and just wanted to be in her energy. Katie has a rare gift for creating a safe and non-judgmental space where stories can be shared and transformed. Listen in as we chat about our own stories and how the art of storytelling can be healing and can create connections and trust. If you're new here, you're listening to the How We Get Thru podcast, a place for you to feel connected through deep and meaningful conversations with healers from all over the world. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder and CEO of the How We Get Thru app, and my mission is to bring you affordable and diverse therapy resources to help you get through the hard stuff, all in one place and at your own pace. Welcome to the How We Get Thru community. Welcome back to the How We Get Thru podcast. We have a very special guest today, Katie Quesada, who's a story coach, a speaker, and probably the best communicator I know, and a really good friend. Can I say best friend in late 30s? Yes.
Yeah, we can. Yeah. We're not like, other people say friends. That's a different thing than what we have. We're not like casual acquaintances from the internet. We are like real life.
Yes. Real life friends for like 13 years.
Yes.
So, Katie, thanks for coming on.
Of course. I'm so happy to be here. I'll talk to you all day in voice memos and then we'll just podcast.
Yes,
so it's perfect.
Exactly. If you have a podcast, why don't you have your best friends on, right?
Exactly.
That's what you have a podcast for.
Yes. And we just happen to both have launched things and built things and then, taken a leap kind of simultaneously, which is great.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I obviously know your story, but I would love for you to kind of talk about, and I think it'd be really special hearing your point of view of how you got here and how you create stories for other people and other companies.
Yeah. 6 years ago now, I was working in the nonprofit space. I actually spent all of my 20s as a mega church pastor. Wild. Who was she? Just kidding. You knew her. So I did that. And then life was getting really hard and it was not the right fit and things were falling apart right before my eyes. And I was like, oh no. And lots of life happened in that exact minute. My husband and I sold everything we owned. We moved into a 180 square foot tiny house. And I had, for the last year before that, at that organization, I had been sitting across from people and they were telling me their life story and I would help them say it in 6 minutes or less. And I did that over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I was like, wait, I kind of love this very tiny part of my job is helping people coach them on their own story. So after moving to the RV and I was having a second baby, we were living in a tiny house. Life was wild, right? In that season, I think it was either you or one of my best friends in the whole world. I think it was you who maybe said, are you going to be a story coach? And I was like, wait, what? Is that a job? And, we were like, maybe. And I started doing it. I started working with individuals on public speaking, coaching, and storytelling, and then on individuals who just have been through incredible things on their story. And then the first year I started working with a couple different companies, which was an amazing to say, oh, wait, I can lead workshops on storytelling and communication. And now 4 years later, I get to work with brands like SpaceX and American Eagle and United Healthcare. And we run now my husband and I run a storytelling consulting company. And this is what we do.
I love it. I've had a front row seat to all of it.
You have.
And it's been so amazing. And I wanted to kind of bring you on to the podcast, number one, because we have podcasts every day through voice notes, but
exactly.
I wanted to talk about like the power of story, the stories that we tell ourselves, how it can be healing, and then this external process of how to share our stories, because I think a lot of us get caught up of like, nobody wants to hear it. My story is boring.
Yes.
And I think from what you have even noticed and seen from receiving that there can be so much healing in other people's stories that we think, oh, no one's going to benefit from this.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the work that you do, which I admire so much, obviously, and benefit from being one of your close friends, is we say all the time in story work that like the rough draft is always what's first inside. Like all of us are living in rough draft version of the stories that's going to go out in the world, but the rough draft always lives inside, right? It's the story you're telling yourself. So the story you're telling yourself about leaving your job, about being a mother, about, whatever you're experiencing, about death, tragedy, addiction, all these giant, real human things. All of us are full of rough drafts, right? Versions of the story we've never shared, we've never edited, we've never figured out. And the work you do is you help people with a rough draft, right? You're like, how are you going to get through this? And how do we at least make the rough draft make sense?
Yeah.
Let's give it structure, this internal story you're telling yourself. I mean, you're so great at saying, like, what are the stories that are really going on here? Like, what's really happening under the surface here? Like, who is even saying that? Is anyone? No one is. Like, that's a story you've made up. So that, like, all of those pieces together, then the work that I get to do is take that rough draft and say, oh, is it time to tell it? Is it time to say it out loud? You know, is it time for a stage, a podcast, an Instagram post, or a call to your mother?
Yeah.
You know, whatever those things are, how do we get that story born? So a lot of the work that I do, you know, technically is with companies on corporate communication, on connection, on communication. I help people say less more effectively. So it's concise and compelling communication. But I think here today, you know, for your listeners who are especially so connected in the rough draft, I think a lot of what we discussed together is just this idea that for a lot of your listeners have been through things that it's time to tell people. Do you know what I mean? And like that, like first step is, it's such a hurdle, but it's, I mean, the hill I will die on is that every single person has a meaningful story. Do you know what I mean? That is like every single person that I will stand, because I have sat across from enough people are really amazing. You know this. You know what I mean? Like, you actually hear people's like deepest, darkest thoughts. People come to me as a coach, not as a therapist. You get to hear the really good story. But like, for people are amazing and we all have really incredible stories. And so I think kind of that next step for you and your community might be like, okay, what does it look like if it's time for me to tell it?
Yeah. Yeah. And the healing parts of that too,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Because I think you get a lot of people coming of like, okay, I'm ready to start a podcast, or I'm ready to tell my story.
Yes.
How the hell do I do that?
Right.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I've always heard from you too of like, whoever you meet with, you're like, oh my gosh, they have a wild story. They have a wild story.
Yeah.
I think you have a very beautiful and unique gift to see the story and to pull the thread very easily for people that makes them feel comfortable of like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, the theme of my life is letting go, or the theme of my life is loss.
Yes. And all of us, we're too close to our own story. So let me be clear about that. Like, yes, I have a unique perspective to see into the stories of others because that's the work that I do, but so do you, and so does everyone else looking at someone else's story. Because when you look at someone else's story, you can look at it objectively. But for all of us, you know, even for me, when I'm talking about my own life, I'm like, that's not that interesting. But then I'm like, but that's because I was there.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I lived it. I'm not hearing it for the first time. It's not it's not news, you know? It's like I already lived through the thing. And we've talked about this too, like if there's someone listening, or just in general, this feeling that, well, my story isn't like that crazy. I just like am a mom and I'm home.
Yeah.
Period. Like, that's my current story. I wake up and I put someone down for a nap, and then I feed everyone, and then I go to bed. Like, but the reality is, for all of us, is that all of us are consistently overcoming something, because we're humans, right? We're in the process of overcoming, and overcoming stories are the ones we want to hear, right? Like Pixar's number one rule of storytelling. The number one rule of Pixar storytelling is that we desire to watch characters try more than we want to watch them succeed.
Oh,
so all Disney movies are just people trying shit. And at the end, you know, Moana gets the island and Belle gets the beast. But that's the last 4 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Like, the 97 other minutes are us watching someone attempt.
Yeah.
So we actually do desire to hear stories of people trying. We want to hear you talk about trying to get out of bed and feed your kid and overcome what it feels like to have your identity crisis as a mother. We want to hear these things because those are the stories we really want to hear. So everyone has a really valuable story. I mean, we have to overcome things like comparison, insecurity, fear, you know, where should my story be told? Those kinds of questions always come to play.
Yeah. And what I think you're picking up on is that when we can tell the story, or even when we're watching that Pixar movie, we feel connected because we felt it too.
Yes.
And that's what people want to like really understand and can like grasp. It's not that did they do it or not. It's the journey of getting there that's relatable.
Right. And what I teach in my workshops all the time is really great storytellers. What they're not doing is telling a great story. What they are doing is making you think about yourself. So really great storytellers actually just make you, like, you know, when you're listening to like a TED Talk, or you're watching someone on stage, or you're listening to a podcast, you know, people don't love this podcast because they're like, Jen's great. She's great. I mean, I'm your number one fan. But what they're thinking is like, me too. My thing. Like, all of us are so overwhelmingly thinking about ourselves. And the first thing we could do to admit that, the better. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
So but the sooner you can get your story to connect with the story of others, the better. And that's kind of the process of getting it out and saying like, okay, here's what I've been through. Here's what I learned. You know, you get to actually walk someone through that. I say all the time that like when you share the hard parts of your story, then you decide to give someone else a survival guide. right? Like we really get to walk people through that.
Yeah. What do you think's like your favorite story of your life so far? Sorry, this is
like my own life?
Yeah, like what? We did not prep this. Sorry,
Yeah,
guys,
no, give it to me. Ask me all of them. Sorry,
I know.
I don't know. I think that's a great question. I think the story that I have tied most in the bow is Danny and I only having my husband Danny and I only having 30 minutes to decide to sell everything we own and move into an RV, which was that's one of my favorite stories because I still look back and think, oh my gosh, we really did only have 30 minutes to decide to change our entire life. And we said yes, and we did it.
Yeah.
And we lived in an RV for 2 years, which is how we were able to afford our home. I'm like, sometimes I think about that and I'm like, and you were there in real time. Like, like literally I was texting you this 30 minutes. Like we might sell everything. So that's the story that I think I just like love looking back on because it really it consistently gives me the courage to remember like you're allowed to just make shit up and decide to live a new story tomorrow. And everything can change and that's okay and it's good. Like the girl whose backyard we lived in, our friend Annie, she used to say to me all the time, your story reminds me all the time that you can color outside the lines. Like, and I love that line. You know, I'm like, oh, that's so great. And I think that's helpful for me because I think a lot of the rest of my life, I have a lot of lines that I've colored in. Yeah, I'm like, I married my high school sweetheart. We are happy. We have 2 children and live in, like suburbia. Like there's all these lines that I'm not really that kind of person, I don't feel like. So I think breaking those molds is important. But I think the story that I've had the hardest time figuring out how to process is leaving organized religion.
Yeah.
So, and I still don't have it. We still talk about it all the time. So I have no bows to that story. I'm just in a constant evolution of like, there are pieces of it that it was so much of who I was in every single way, period.
Yeah.
That undoing that now 5 years later even is, how do I exist in the world? What is spirituality? What is God to me? What does the church mean? What do I want for my kids? What if the church was the most important part of my teens? What does that mean for my kids? How do I, all those really big questions that it's the story that doesn't make very much sense yet.
Yeah. It's still unfolding for you in a lot of ways and deconstructing it as well. Where I think like the tiny living, there's like almost this immediate outcome that you can look back on of like, we were able to afford a house because we said yes to this crazy thing.
Yes.
And that feels like there's an ending to that.
Yes. And obviously, as we both know, some stories have bows and some stories never get them. And that's, that's the work I get to do all the time with clients. I'm like, oh, wait, this fell apart and actually nothing good has ever come from it. And I'm like, thank you for sharing that. But I do believe, I talk about this a lot. Like the root word of restore is to re-story something. And the root word of destroy is to de-story something. And we're all always simultaneously experiencing restoration or de-storying depending on who we're connecting with and what stories we're believing. But like as good friends, like our active job is to re-story for each other. Like you've got this. I believe in you. You are capable. I see a future for you that makes sense. I know who you are as a person. These restorative words. So I think even if a season is uncomfortable or sticky or unhealed or there's no bow, we still have to look back, tell the truth and say, but what I'm learning in the midst of it is resiliency or strength or adaptation or spirituality or
being uncomfortable.
Yes.
I don't know what it is yet.
Yes. Yeah. So there's always ways to like pull like ideas or lessons, even if there is no bow. Yeah. Which is the restorative work.
Yeah. And I think even just that example for you, it's like you grew up in the church in a lot of ways. And so if you even look at your timeline, you've been in the church more than you've been out of it.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that it's like,
yes.
What happens now in that? Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Ugh. I think what you've done really well for me is that restoring part of like reminding me who I am.
Yeah.
And I think you're very, very good at that. I think you're very quick. You're like, I hear what you're saying, and this is also true about you.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for people that are wanting to tell their stories when we think about the like criticism that might come with that, which I feel like is another block. Does that happen a lot in your work?
Absolutely. I mean, most people don't want to tell their stories because of one random person.
Yes.
It's like, but my aunt.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, the whole world's not going to hear your story because of your aunt. This is what you're telling me. Like 1,000 people are not going to learn from your experience because you are worried about your aunt's text message that will follow. Like, let's just clarify that. Let's say it out loud. Let's tell the whole truth about that. And they're like, yes. I'm like, okay, then let's talk to your aunt.
Yeah.
Or let's shrink the story of your aunt's point of view. And like increase the story of everyone else's, you know, like let's remind ourselves of why storytelling matters. I mean, we've talked about this, but the great Anne Lamott quote is, if they didn't want me to tell this story, they should have acted differently. Like that your job is not to create a story that will make everyone feel better. Your job is to tell the truth. You know, like to tell the story of what really happened and how it felt. Like what I say about restory and destory all the time, and with teams and with, you know, in these corporate events, but also what I say all the time is that restorying, you have to tell the truth with a hopeful future. Destorying is telling the truth with a critical bent towards the past. And all of us are always dealing with that, but both of them, they tell the truth. What I'm not looking for is toxic positivity, right? I'm not trying to be like, and I say this, like, you know what's not a good story? That was crazy. I'm fine.
Yeah.
Nobody cares, right? Like, I mean, and that's like such a spiritual trope, but in a lot of church environment, it's like, you know, things are really hard, but God is good. Bye.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, but what? Were you addicted to drugs? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
and what happened?
Yeah, exactly. They're like, nah, all good. God heals. And you're like, but did you go to rehab?
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
And did you almost die? Tell me the whole truth, at least.
Yeah.
Tell me the whole story, because you're leaving out my survival guide when you miss those points.
Right. And again, there's that disconnection in the trusting of the story because there's no depth to it.
Yes.
And I can get that a lot with like people sometimes. And I'm like, but tell me, like, who are you? Like, tell me something real. Tell me something I can like hold on to, because I have a big BS meter, you know? I'm like, ugh.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
And I think it's part of like trust, right? You won't trust what somebody is telling you from a podcast or from a stage if they aren't real, if they aren't actually telling the whole part of the story. And that can be really scary from the person saying it. But that, I think, is just very important, because that's, again, that connection piece that like I think it was like back to school night. This just happened.
Yeah.
The teacher's just going over like what the school does and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, girl, who are you? Like, tell me something real about you. You're with my child every day. I feel like I don't know you, so I don't know if I can trust you.
Yes. And this is like old school versus new school ways of operating in leadership. So this is very common in the corporate space. There are a lot of male, stale, and pale white men who, that's what they call, like, you know, male, stale, and pale is like this very specific type of CEO in a suit, you know, who's like, I am the vice president of strategic dynamic futures. That environment, the old school way of leadership operating is, you're going to trust me because of the letters after my name and the experience I have. The new school way of operating, especially for all of us who are on the internets, like anyone involved in social media regularly in any way, which is a huge part of the population, needless to say, and most people under the age of 50 and more. But so the new school way of creating trust is through shared story and relationship, because people care less and less and less where people went to school.
Right.
Like, people care less and less and less how much experience you have. People, exactly like you're saying, you're like, I'm going to leave my daughter with you. Show me your character.
Yeah.
Like, I know you can teach. You got the job.
Yeah.
Like, I know you're good. Like, that's great. I see your classroom. Lovely. Clip art. Fantastic.
Yep.
At the end of the day, though, when you're tired and sad and she shows up in a bad mood, like, just reveal something to me that's going to give me that element of trust. So that exchange of storytelling, there are also a lot of women who have the desire to appear perfect or successful, and in turn self-isolate. Do you know what I mean? They're like, I've done really well in business. Things are going really well. We're all doing really well. I have like, you know,
it's this vulnerable.
Like, it's like a white Suburban garage door closed. You know that analogy? Like, we drive our white Suburbans in the house and close the garage, and then like all these mothers across the country are crying, you know? And they think, but out on the outside, they're like, things are great. That's how I connect. But it isn't, which you are like a pro at this. Like, it isn't. It doesn't work. At some point, you're going to have to tell the real story if you want to have real relationships and real connection.
Yeah. So it's interesting, I think, because I'm not in the corporate world. I mean, sometimes I am.
Yeah, you are. You pop in.
I pop in. But kind of, again, pulling that thread, I think, especially for women in work and at home.
Yes.
We can't say we're not okay. We have to say we're doing great.
Yeah.
And that story leads to isolation and disconnection.
Yeah, exactly. And in so many ways, I think, like, a great example in the corporate space for women is that I've worked with teams, and a woman says at the table, like, a leader, a female manager says, oh yeah, 3 years ago, I survived breast cancer. And the entire team is like, what? I've worked with you every day for 5 years.
Wow.
And she's like, yeah, I chose to keep it private, which that is her choice.
Yeah.
But after that, when she's come through it or whenever she is ready, like stories are born on your own time in your own like boundary and capacity. So I don't want to blame her for that. Everyone's allowed to have their own privacies. But the team trusted her and the dynamic changed so drastically when they were let into her story. And they saw themselves as a part of it, you know, not as a passerby. So it really is, yeah, it's such a currency.
Mm-hmm. Where have you seen stories, like the most successful stories happen? Do you think it's happening in corporate world? Do you think it's happening in friendships, motherhood, entrepreneurship?
The greatest stories are told at dinner tables. So, you know, they're not told on stages. Like, that's great. You know, the public speaking is fun. Keynote speaking is great. Like, the internet's fine. It's shiny. But, like, actual influence, we know the research proves that if you want to actually have influence on a person's life, it's going to be when you can share a meal with them. Like, if you want to have, like, when you say the word influencer, like, I say that, I'm like, oh, if you want to be a really big influencer, like, wonder who you're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner with. You know, like, those are the people who you're really influencing and sitting across from. Like, you know, your personal opinions have changed and shaped me in huge ways. We've been friends for 13 years and we've shared 1 trillion meals and we get to play in, you know, 94 play dates later. And, you know, all of those things. And I think that like, so the greatest stories I think are told there. So I think it's actually really small scale. It's when you're finally like, hey, I'm worried about this, or I think this, or my mom did this, or I'm afraid of this, or what about the world in this? You know, I mean, I think both of us were really shaped by moving into a more diverse environment out of being in a predominantly white environment for a season. And that changed our stories and how we think and vote and act. And like, oh, wait, when we move into when we get face to face with the stories of others, not just the internet stories, not just like, I mean, yes, obviously we know who the best storytellers are. It's like Warner Brothers and Pixar. Like, great, they are the best. All hail. But in real time, when we talk about influence, like it's face-to-face storytelling. So, and that's why it matters so much to me, because I'm like, wait, that means that you, whoever you are listening, you eat dinner with people and you go to lunch with people. Like, you have a very valuable point of view that's worth refining and figuring out.
Yeah. Which reminds me, fun fact, we were sitting around, well, it was a dinner table. It wasn't a dinner table. Maybe it was lunch. But I was like, I think I'm going to start this app. Or I don't know what I'm doing, but I know how to help people get through shit.
Yes.
And Katie Quesada said that's what it should be called, How We Get Thru. And I was like, okay.
Here it is. And now it's an alive thing, you know? Like, that's...
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing how much, like, yeah, and that's the restorative work we do for each other and the restorative work we all hopefully are doing. Like, any woman listening whose friend has an idea. Like, I mean, I'm a firm believer in like, yes, and yes. And what else could it be? Get it, girl. Like, you know, that's our job. We're like, if someone has an idea, especially something that like for you, you know, doubles down on the best parts of who they are. Like, when that happens, it's so worthy to say like, wait, no, this is obviously already working in who you are. Let's record it. Yeah. Like, that makes so much sense. So I think, engaging in that together is so helpful.
Yeah. How do you think storytelling has helped you in motherhood? I'm hitting with a lot of hard questions.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think about that a lot. I mean, I'll tell you all my failures and then we can go from there in it. So like,
you're a great mom. So start there.
Yes. I love my daughters and I am on an endless quest of motherhood. But when my daughter was like 3, my older daughter, who is highly, incredibly tall, highly articulate, and old for her age in her body.
Emotionally.
Emotionally. Yeah. She's an eldest daughter through and through. Whatever anyone thinks about that. Like, last night, she who is 8 years old, was looking at our family calendar and matching it with her agenda. By herself quietly. Like, Mom, do you think I need to write down your work thing? And I'm like, no, you do not. You're 8. I'll call you when it's Tuesday, right? But she was running around and I was saying something about math and like maybe it was like pre-K, but I was telling a story about her in front of her that was like, yeah, she's really having a hard time in math. She hasn't been doing great. Like, she's struggling with this thing. And she turned around and looked at me like, what the heck? And I had this like very clear parenting moment where I was like, oh no, the stories we tell about our children in front of our children are wildly important. And I feel very strongly about that in parenting. And I've connected with some parenting groups and talked to some other families about this, but I have just started to pay attention to very keenly the way I speak about her in front of her and any child. And basically, there's no more room for that anymore. You're not allowed to speak poorly about your child in front of your child, period. Like, you don't do that. Like, you just speak about how much they are the joy of your life, you know? And like that reality, I mean, the stories we tell about our kids, in front of our kids, and to our kids is like 3 different story buckets. And I think I'm starting to pay attention to all of them.
Yeah. And I think it comes from, like, as a parent, like, just wanting to, like, share, like, I'm having problems with this, or my child is having problems with this. And so it comes from a really, like, honest place, but in how it's done, it can really impact the way they view, like, oh, you think about that, or you think that way about me.
Yes.
And how we're creating their story for themselves.
Right. And it creeps up on you in real time. Like, both of our kids are growing up. So like, we were there at each other's hospital baby births. So of course, when they're a baby, you're talking about them. You're like, they didn't sleep and they don't eat. And I'm like, what's going on with my boobs? And like I'm bleeding, you know? So then it's so natural to just keep saying to your best friend, like, she didn't sleep, she didn't eat, she's not, you just keep telling those same narratives. And then one day you're like, oh my gosh, this child is fully comprehending. I mean, I just told you that I realized that my daughter can read everything I type on my phone.
Yes.
Like, this is a whole new level.
Smart book.
Yes. I'm like, there it goes. Exactly. She can't read about this stuff. So like, this is at every level of parenting, there's a new stages of stories maybe you should stop telling and stories you should start telling. And like thinking through that is really valuable, because I think we're just, exactly. It's not negative. It's not like intentionally bad. It's just how we're all surviving in motherhood. But thinking about it is important.
Yeah. And I've started doing, like, if it's kind of like, you know, my youngest just started TK, and there's just a lot of fun stories, the way he says things.
Yes.
So
oh my gosh, and he's so cute.
He's a cute.
I mean, he's a real cute kid.
And so I've started to, like, he'll tell me a story, and then I'll say, oh, hey, do you want to tell Dad about the blueberries? Because I told you he's eating blueberries at school, and there is no blueberry bush. So so, and then he'll choose either yes or no. Yeah. But it's like kind of my sly way of, like, you tell the story, because sometimes my kids are very like, stop talking about me. Yeah. Don't tell that story.
Yes.
And you can feel it, or they'll say it, and you're like, oh, dang it. Okay, you're right. Like, because they know, they can feel when you're like making food.
Yes, exactly. Yes, which is crazy.
Yes. And you're like, this is wild, right? You know, but it's almost like allowing them to tell their own story in their own words.
Yes.
Or not.
Right.
But giving them the option to do that when they're around.
And I mean, this just happened to us last week, because my daughter got stung by a stingray in her foot at the beach. Ugh. And I told someone at school registration, Gracie has such a crazy story. Yesterday, she got stung by a stingray. And in my head, I'm like, this is such a cool story, Gracie. Tell everyone the story. And later she was like, first of all, no. And second of all, that's not a cool story. My foot hurt.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, but I said, do you want me to tell you why people think it's a cool story? And she said, no. And I said, okay, thank you. And I walked away. You know, and I'm like, okay, well, what are you gonna do? You know, but I was like, no, this is, in my head, I'm like, no, one day you're gonna realize, like, this is like a crazy animal, and like that's kind of rare, and like, whoa, you have a survival story. You know, I'm like, this is a cool thing. Like, you got a cool bag and a lifeguard sticker that said, I survived a stingray. I'm like, Gracie, like, you know, but she's like, nope. And then guess what? It's not my story to tell. End of story. So that's it. So kind of like holding that it's tricky. It's so tricky.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I talk about my kids a lot on the podcast, and I try to do it, which I probably don't always, but like how it's my story. Yes, and how I'm responding and how I'm trying to work through things, because we are so connected in that. And again, there's, I think, 2 sides to a story. Right? And then how do you kind of stay connected to your truth and what you want to say and what feels real for you, and allow that there's another side to that as well.
Right.
Like one day she might be like, why are you talking about me? And I'm like, oh, sorry, girl.
Right. And like in the church world, that's fairly common, because when you're a speaking pastor, you're constantly growing up listening to men be like, last week, my daughter, you know, and the daughter in the front row is like rolling her eyes. And there is a whole thing about like pastors finally starting to say to their kids, can I tell this story? Like, that was actually an interesting, pastors' lives were always the book of stories.
Yeah.
Like, and then all these pastor kids, and all these pastor kids are like, I'm 13 in the front row, and you're talking about how I, like, you know, broke up with my boyfriend and cried to you on the stage 2 days later. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, it's too fresh, too real, and too big.
And it's not your story.
It's not your story, right? And so like how you process that it's really important with as parents with our kids. And I think there's like something interesting that I have not yet made sense of, but our children watch the videos of them as babies, the iPhone photos, like together in 2021, and it's like that little lullaby playing in the background. And they say things like, wasn't I so cute? I loved that house. That was such a great day. Remember when and I'm like, you know what I didn't have as a kid? A slideshow.
Right.
I'm like, I had 4 pictures that I cut with scissors.
Yes.
And then it was like half my face, and then my brother wrote a black Sharpie over the front of it. Like, I'm like, what? Yes. I'm like, this is such an interesting thing that my children are narratively watching their own life as a movie be played back to them in real time. That's new for us.
Yes. And the memories, for me, I will always remember something from a picture.
Yes.
Yes. And I'll remember that, what happened, what was happening there. But if there's no pictures, I'm like, I don't know. What was my life like?
And isn't that interesting? Will our kids have like really good memories, or will their memories be the pictures we take?
Yeah.
Right? Weird.
Okay, Frankie said something the other day. She was like eating a bowl of cereal, and she like had her hair down or whatever. And she's like, Mom, put me on the internet. I said, excuse me? She's like, put me on the internet. Like when you're like scrolling and you see like those kids.
Yes.
And I was all like,
isn't that so wild?
Like, and I said, Frankie, the internet is written in pen.
Right. Exactly. It's like step 1. Yes.
It will be up there forever.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't think I was like, no, I'm not going to put you on the internet. But I was like, this is what the internet is. And I probably should be on my phone less.
Right.
But it was just so interesting. Like, I don't know what this is about story, but like she wanted to almost like create her own story on the internet, which makes sense. But at the same time, it's like, what are we allowing them to be? We're doing a tangent, but.
Yes. No, I could talk about children and the internet all day long. But yeah, because what their core desire is like, wait, I have a story that's worth telling too.
Yeah.
And I want to be seen for me and who I am, like my kids record little videos that are not on the internet. They're just on, their devices or whatever. But it's like, a 7-year-old laughing. It's her and, recording a story with her sister. They will never, ever, 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 ever go on the internet. But it's, privately locked in the non-internet connected device. But it's them crafting stories and making videos. And I mean, honestly, at the root of it, the truth is humans are storytelling creatures. So how we have survived up to this point as humans is through narrative storytelling. All of humanity to this point has happened because of oral storytelling, connected storytelling, written storytelling. Like we say things like, the fire burns you. Uncle died in there.
Yes.
Like, I mean, like literally humanity has survived through narrative storytelling. Like that is all of organized religion. That is all of countries and nations. It is like we as a people believe this thing. Like the stories we believe shape all of it. So children desiring to tell stories is so innate.
Yeah.
It's like, it's really human. It's like, let me figure out what my story is and my voice and my sound and my thing. And what's our story? What's our family story? What do we believe? These kinds of things.
Yeah. Which is also interesting because I was like listening about witches.
Oh, yeah.
And it was kind of the same concept because, women gossip and they like, tell me on the goss, do all the things that we're always chatting. It's a form of connection, but it also was a form of protection. Hey, this guy is creepy.
Yes.
Hey, watch out for that guy, blah, blah, blah. Hey, this person, blah, 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 blah. So again, at the heart of it was this protection and connection. And sometimes it just morphs into like really negative stuff and really bad things that aren't helpful or kind. But the core of it is for information.
Right. Information sharing. That's vital. Yes. Is actually storytelling.
To survival.
Yes.
Yes. It was a form of protection and communication. And where do we still use that today? And I think like social media, like it's, it gets a little polarized where we feel that the world is so unsafe because we see so many unsafe things. But actually in our community and in our real world, it's just as safe as it was.
Yes.
I don't know, when we were growing up.
Yes.
So it's interesting. It's like stories are important in the connection, but also how are we kind of like depicting the stories of our reality or our truth? And is this a good story for me? Or is this not a great story for me?
Yes. And if we can learn how to do that work right there, what you just said, you know what I mean? Like we will have, our mental health will all uptick 19 points. Every single person, right? I mean, I feel like I ask myself all the time, like, when I see something on the internet, when I like have someone share something, I ask myself, is this story's goal to make me afraid? And if you can answer, and the truth is, the almost entire political spectrum right now, the answer to that question is yes. And it's true for, You know, is this story's goal to make me afraid? Is this person's goal to make me afraid? Then I can say, first of all, should I feel afraid? Will this really affect me? And or do I want to hear the story at all? And I tend to really, when I'm scrolling and I'm like, oh, this story's goal is to make me afraid. I'm like, unless my child is hurt, unless our family, unless there's something, you know, that I really need to pay attention to, I really do make sure that I like keep scrolling on, because I don't want to be a part of those stories. Like, I don't want that. Yeah. There's a whole world out there whose one desire is for the stories that you hear to make you feel afraid, worried, anxious, or insecure.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of internal work to notice that.
Yes.
Because it's like trained to keep you there.
Exactly. Yes, the actual robots, the algorithm's job is to keep you there. Yes.
Yeah. And then I see like really and you share a lot of like fun and like really beautiful creative things, and I'm like, God, the internet's great.
Yeah.
You know what I
Couldn't
mean?
agree more. Yes, it makes me smile, it makes me laugh, it makes me happy. I talk to so many people I would never normally talk to. I mean, so many wins. But then I do see people I know who the only things they share are like, will 2026 be the end?
No. Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not waking up every day wondering about that. Like,
no,
I'm not. I can't live like that. Like, maybe is it going to be? I don't know. But neither do you.
Doesn't matter. Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. And you decided to take your kids' faces off your Instagram.
You did.
Like 2 years ago?
Is it?
Year?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was that choice from?
A part of it was from me being in a grocery store. I was living in LA for years with you. And then we both moved back to Orange County, which is where we are now. And I had my kids online every single day. We lived in an RV. I literally posted them every single day on my stories. Like, we had our whole life on the internet. And I came back to Orange County and I was in a grocery store and someone said, Gracie Laney. And my kids like looked at them and I didn't know them. Oh. And I was like, oh, hi. And this woman who's so wonderful and probably someone's aunt who followed me from when I was 12, you know, who knows? Yeah. I'm sure she somehow is connected to me. But she was like, Gracie Laney, I know you. You don't know me, but I know you. And that one line was enough for me. I was like, oh, that is not wise. My children should not have a grown-up who knows their names and faces and every single thing about them and where they live. And I don't know that grown-up. Like, I have lost. So that for me was it. I was just like, that's all. That was the one. I had always thought about it. I had a little bit of like this isn't my story to tell. It isn't they're living real life as children, you know, like, it's not, I mean, when they're babies, it is a little bit different, you know, they're like kind of like a little bit of a Cabbage Patch doll who lives in a fun house, you know, like there's some of that where it's like, no one's going to be like, there's that girl, you know, when she's 5, my kids are completely different, you know, than they used to. Our kids are changing every day, but the core part of it was that it isn't my story to tell anymore, you know, like they're now their own people living their own life. And I don't think it's my job to put them on the internet. I think that's a risk I'm taking for myself, which because of the good things I love about it, but it wasn't one I needed to take for them. So it was a tricky decision and people didn't like it. I mean, and that's so connected to story work. Like, I mean, when I was moving out of the RV, people DM'd me and said, Katie, we love you living in the RV. Why are you moving out of the RV? And I remember thinking, oh, this is why people stay stuck in their stories. Like, this is literally why people stay stuck in their stories, because you liked that version of my story. It doesn't make you the author of it. Yeah. I'm the author. This is my life. I'm glad you liked my RV story. You can unfollow me. You can leave me forever, but I'm going to go live in a house with a closet and a bathroom door that closes tightly. Like, these are the things that I'm going to do, even though you liked my last story. And so many women get stuck in their stories because one person really likes it, you know, in a good way. Yeah. And they think, well, I got to live like this forever because my mom's glad. Yeah. You know, and it's like, wait, no, you're the author, you're the hero. You only get to be the hero of your own life. In everyone else's life and at work, you are only the guide in the hero's journey story. So it's very important to remember, you're the hero of your own story. You are deciding what is happening next. Like, you are the author. It is very important to live that way.
Oh, that's so true. And I do think it's a hard choice to like take something away when you're building a community online. Like, it can feel risky. It can feel like, and they probably feel like a disconnection, but it also the risk for you was higher than this disconnection to a mom in Utah or whatever, right? Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Or in California, somewhere, you know? Yeah. Do you think this kind of, I mean, it's interesting because our generation like grew up on the internet, essentially, right?
right?
I was one of the first like colleges to get a Facebook, an EDU.
Oh, yeah, because you went to like a
access.
nice school. Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't. I was like much later. I mean, I went to like a tiny private Christian school, you know?
Yeah.
We weren't like hip to the trends like you guys were.
But I'm like, I have all these crazy college photos up on Facebook still.
Yes.
That I'm like, oh my gosh. So I think we've even like felt or at least I have felt the repercussions of living online and like totally being different and not wanting that part of my life like on the internet for whoever to see. And I think I've like tried to untag or whatever, but a lot of them are my photos. So it's just this crazy thing. Do you think though, for you, like sharing your family and your life is a part of the like church culture that you grew up in as well? Or do you think it's just part of like who you are?
I think one of the reasons that religious communities do thrive on the internet, you know, Mormon, Utah culture, Christian culture, like, I mean, a lot of these organizations thrive on the internet because they desire to live a life that is exemplary. So that's a reality. Do you know what I mean? Like those women are often not pretending. Their core desire is to have a televisable life.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to put on the internet. You know, it's easy to put on the internet your life when there is nothing involved that would be, you know, like a cancel item, you know, like, there's nothing for anyone to judge you on when you're like a perfect mother who feeds people and, you know, lives on your farm. It's amazing.
The ballerina farm
I know.
drama?
Can you believe all that? I know we should talk about that later.
Oh my gosh.
I want to get all into that. Yeah. I mean, and I follow her and I love watching her every single day. I could watch her milk a cow and bake a pie every day the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I mean, I love consuming her story.
Yeah.
She is beautiful. Her children are beautiful. Her husband is beautiful. They are beautiful. I'm very happy for them. I think that she did choose that life, but is it one that I could manage? Absolutely not. I got 2 kids. Can you imagine 8?
No. And being pregnant that much?
So much pregnancy.
I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah. And milking cows while you're being milked?
Yeah.
I mean, I think about that all the time. She's literally nursing while milking cows. I'm like, this woman is connected to the earth. Yes. What were we talking about? Okay. The story and the religious upbringing. Yes, I do think there is a connection there. But I think all of us like have to come to a point where we get to say, what story do I want to tell? And that's what you were talking about with Facebook, even in your college years. Like now that we're grown-ups and we've lived through 15 years of the internet, all of us actually get to decide, I want to live a different story on the internet, which is, I love that I get to do this with people. Like I get to sit across from clients and say to them, oh, you don't have to tell that story anymore.
Yes.
You just get to be something else.
Yeah.
That's fine. Like there are countless women probably listening to this who are going through such a huge identity shift that they're like, oh no, I was though a lawyer. Yeah. That's all I've ever been. Now, what the hell am I going to be if I'm not a lawyer and I have to go live on a farm and milk cows? How am I ever going to tell people are not going to like that story? The story's too jarring. How do I change my story? It doesn't matter because the very terrible truth I need to tell you is people aren't paying attention.
Yes.
Like people are thinking about themselves and their own stories. Change your life and live it. The right people will follow you. Like that is such a hard truth. But we really overemphasize that people care about our story. And yes, people were DMing me, Katie, stay in the RV. We love it. But guess who else she DM'd? Probably 94 people that day.
Right.
You know, and someone we used to be in contact with said, which I adore, like I'll say this forever, but you're not allowed to give inexpensive voices to the cheap seats. You're not allowed to give expensive voices to the cheap seats, right? Like you can't give a pricey courtside voice to people who are paying for cheap seats in your life. Like those people they're not courtside in my life. Like people who live in the nosebleeds, they're not the ones saying to me, here's how you live your life. Courtside people, it's like costly. Like it's a lot. So I think as women, we get to just decide. We get to decide what story we're telling. We get to curate it. You get to delete all those photos. You get to write a whole new bio. Tomorrow, you can post a new picture of yourself that says, Jen Hershey, milk farmer. She gets to be a milk farmer, which I know you will never be, although you do have chicken now, right? One chicken.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. But I think that like how we get to change our story, and that's such a gift. We're grown-ups. Like this is such a good thing. And so many women are like, I can't change my story because I've always lived in Michigan, because my mom is a ballerina, because my kids are going to be affected by this. But like really authoring your life is the greatest human superpower. It's all we've got, right? Like what else do we have? And so it's just beautiful. It's so important to like lean into that, because so many of us are stuck in our story because like we said at the beginning, because of our random aunt.
Yes. Yeah. And eventually it becomes like our own cage, right? And so we can sometimes maybe project onto one person.
So
I
true.
can't change because of this, or I can't tell my story because of this. And I've been there. So I totally have a lot of empathy for that. But is like, as human beings, we're born on this earth to evolve, to develop, to grow physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in identity. And so it's almost like if your story hasn't changed, why not? Right? Where are you stuck in a place where you are no longer that person? And is that why you're kind of miserable? Because you're trying to fit into this narrative that actually isn't you anymore.
Right.
And I think that's what it's interesting. I know I'm like pulling this thread for both of us. I think we both do that for people. In our own ways, is like, here's how I see the truth of where you are now. What are your blocks in actually owning that? What needs to be healed? What do you need to move through in order to kind of own this place? Because you're trying on like an old sweater that doesn't fit anymore. And everyone can tell, you know, like, so it's like you're living a life to protect yourself and to protect other people, but the people that know you and the people that care about you will sense that and will understand, like, and I think our fear is like, oh, I can't change the sweater because they expect me to be in this sweater.
Right.
And they're like, I don't care about the sweater. I care if you're happy.
And I think having friends, like, I think is a gift that we've been given that is so wonderful. But we have had a lot of friends and we are for each other. But it's really important to have friends who are like, you know what? I don't even care if you have a sweater. Do you want to make your own sweater? Do you want to go to a sweater store? Do you even like sweaters? Do you want to wear a tank top? Do you think a sports bra is good? Should you wear a sports bra? Great. You can wear a sports bra and I'll wear a sweater. You don't need to be like me. And I think that there are a lot of communities of women, especially, who are like, it's safe for me if you stay like me. And that story is so tricky. But like, I think when you especially have some entrepreneurial friends or friends who have moved, I think a lot of people have moved around the world. You know what I mean? I love stories of people who are like, when I do workshops and they like map out their story, or they're like, when I was 19, I moved from India. And I'm like, you view the world so differently than I do in the best ways. And I have so much to learn from you, because here I am, Southern California Katie, lifelong, you know, like I've traveled a ton, but that person's unique perspective has so much to show me. And it would not be beneficial for me to say to them, now be like me. Like, but I think that like when you have enough diversity of thought, entrepreneurial spirit, when you surround yourself with some dreamers who make shit up and then it comes to life, like, or people who change their whole life. You know, when those kinds of things start to kind of happen around you, you start to think like, oh, great news. I'm not trapped. Or the sweater, I don't have to wear the sweater anymore.
And I think if this is you and you're listening, like, the antidote for fear is love, right? And in order to, if you can't feel love for yourself, who can you call on, your friends, your community, or whatever, to really speak that out? And I think, you know, coming from our past of the church world, again, that can be really tricky if you're changing and evolving and the circle doesn't want you to. And that might not be the safest place for you to tell your new story. And that's okay.
And you probably won't find a new circle until you tell it. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, and that's a part of the story work as well. When I start telling a different story, the right people will come to me. Like, and when that happens and we're saying, oh my gosh, me too, no way, crazy, you know, and then you can slowly build that story. And then you'll have a couple really great friends who evolve with you your whole life. You know, like we were talking about this, like my husband and I have been together 20 years. And I was just saying to him, like, we've been 9 people. Like,
at least.
And I'm like, thank God we just keep waking up and saying, I still like you. Like, I'm like, we have been so many people, like 16-year-old Danny. I'm like, I think back on him and I'm like, what a sweet teen. You know, that little boy was. And I'm like, but now me, like we've evolved through, like we've had multiple careers, moves. We've lived in 7 houses, like religious organizations. Like we've been through, like you're going to have a couple people in your life who evolve with you and then some where you have to find new centers. And that is what it is. Like, and that's kind of a part of the journey.
And even I think too, in both of our experiences, like I think in the church too, like kind of leaving some circles and then refinding them again. Because we've all broken out and evolved. And so again, there's some times and there's some friendships that come back. And they're like, there could be a lot of healing in that and a lot of understanding and maybe a little bit more realness of like, I'm sorry that I treated you this way, or I'm sorry that I thought of you this way when it was too scary for me to leave, or it was too scary for me to make that choice. Because I talk about this a lot, like we're all mirrors for each other. And sometimes when the mirror is too much, it becomes like, I can't fucking look at that. You need to leave, you know? And that can be really painful. But again, when you're standing in your truth and you're standing in your story, that is kind of what you have to keep coming back to and finding the right mirror where someone can like maintain that reflection for you.
Yes.
And be in that reflection for you. And again, it's just a sign that you've outgrown something because you're evolving.
And like valuing that when you're listening to someone else's story. Like I say, like the greatest storytellers are always interested before they're interesting. Like when you can really start to ask questions of the mirrors in your life, you know, and like get to know them and care about them and validate them and see that in them instead of like, what can I get? What do I gain? What does this mean for me? You know, is this, all those kinds of questions we ask instead, like, what made you the way you are? Like, you know?
Yeah.
And like, there's so much left to discover about the people in your life. Like, there's so much that we get to like find out and know and hear and like learn from one another, no matter how long you've known someone. So there's just so much there in storytelling to like remind yourself, like, oh, wait, my stories are worth sharing with the people I love and with the world. Like my stories are worth sharing because I've been through things that other people might need. Like my story, like I tell people all the time, like you have to craft your story for one person and then it will become universal. But storytelling, like the crazy psychology of storytelling is that what is hyper specific becomes universal. But if you try to do something universal, like the example is like, you know, if you're hyper specific is like I was walking through the hospital room and I remember how it smelled and I felt so sad. Right. And all of us are like,
yes,
I'm there. But instead what we do is something universal where we're like, sadness, grief, live, laugh, love. You're like, what?
I don't know.
What are you talking about? Right? I don't care.
I had, which I've heard, I don't know, it's probably a TikTok, but, and this will come.
You read in a research paper, also known as TikTok?
I read this article, aka just read the headline.
Exactly. I saw a reel.
Yeah. But she was saying like, she was talking about Taylor Swift and Beyonce, and I think this like ties in with storytelling. Like Taylor Swift sings something very specific that feels universal.
Yes.
Where Beyonce sings universal things that feel very personable.
Ooh, I like that.
And it was such a beautiful like strength of both of them, but that this is the different ways they tell the story that you can connect.
Cool.
It's either like a revolution or you know, what's happening for us as a community, as a world, or it's heartbreak that's happening personally that you felt before.
Yes.
And just that connection to both, they're very different, but the entryway is the same as like, I know what that feels like, or that makes me feel something.
Yes. Or I just see myself in it, period.
Yeah.
Like, and that's a great example because I think, you know, in Taylor Swift songs, I'm like crying in the car and I have zero relationship with breakups. I am like, you know, I'm the one human on earth who never really broke up with anyone.
Yeah.
But I'm like, oh my gosh, like I feel so many, like I'm screaming Olivia Rodrigo, you know what I mean? I'm like, wait, but I still feel it so deeply. And then with Beyonce, you know, I'm like, me and you are dancing to Texas Hold'em in Texas together. And I'm like, should I get a cowboy hat? Do you think I need boots? You know, I'm like,
alligator tears?
Yes, exactly. Because all of a sudden what is true is this is true for me.
Yeah.
Because I see myself in it and it creates something that, I mean, if you want to make someone do something, then you have to make them feel something. So that is like a universal truth right now. We are enacted and we move in action when we experience emotive feelings. So, and the fastest way to make someone feel something is through storytelling. So like music and storytelling are the quickest way to get anyone to feel or act. So I feel like that's what they do best is they make us feel things and then we want to act upon them. And they're like, this is who I am. This is what I'm about, you know?
Yeah. Which is so interesting because we were talking about fear before.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of noticing where is this making you feel fear or is this making you feel love and inspired? And really kind of maintaining, I think, for us to heal as a world, we have to tell these stories from love. Love from ourselves and love for other people and not in the fear that this is going to happen to you too. You know, like even like the scariest things of like that one story of that lady, she was so remarkable. She got paralyzed from.
Oh, yeah. My client?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. She's amazing. Yeah, she got in a car accident in Argentina with her family, and she was paralyzed at 19 years old. She was a professional soccer player. Yeah. And then, oh my gosh, yeah, that's a crazy long story. And now she's like an incredible paraplegic who like is a keynote speaker and is literally amazing. she birthed 2 children naturally that no one said she could. I mean, she's incredible.
Yeah. Exactly. So that is not like, oh, don't go to Argentina and get in a car. You know what I mean?
Like, yes.
That's not the point of the story, you know, because things happen and life happens. And how are we still loving ourselves after those things?
Yes. And shout out Mandy Salas. That's her name. And I'll tag her in the show notes. I'll send you her Instagram. You guys can all follow her. She's wonderful.
Yes.
Because her life story is so crazy. Right. How do we take the stories of others and use them as inspiration instead of fear or... and so much of that is how we tell the story, right? I mean, that's the root word of de-story and re-story is like, are you a restorative storyteller?
Yeah.
Or are you a distortive storyteller, right? Distortive storytellers do things like cheap gossip, you know, and like...
clickbait.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's just like, yeah, I'm going to tell you the story because, yeah, you're probably not going to, because of the current market, no one's got shit. Bye. You know, and you're like, okay, great. Well, should I save money? Never. Okay, wait, do I get on a plane? What? Yeah. But restorative storytelling is like, I tell the truth. Things are hard. Things are bad.
Yeah.
Like, but there is a way out. There is a path. I believe in the future. Like I can see forward thinking and I know that for you, it's going to work. You know, like that's restorative thinking versus distortive thinking.
Yeah, like we're all going to go through bad things and what are we going to learn from it or who are we going to be on the other side versus be afraid of these bad things,
right?
You know?
And then go in a hole.
Yeah, and do nothing.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, give me like 3 tips. If somebody is listening and they're like, I need to tell my story or I am ready for that. What are the first 3 things they should do or first thing they should do?
Yeah. Number 1, I want you to take 3 moments from your life. And you do not need to overthink this. So underthink this, okay? Think as fast as you can. You have 1 minute. Write down 3 moments from your life that are a big deal. Graduation, death of my mom, baby being born, okay? You're going to write these 3 things down. Then I want you to take the moment and I want you to give it meaning. So I want you to write down, from that I learned. 1 word, from that I learned. Strength, from that I learned resiliency. I have a course called Story School. I will dive deep into this with you, but this is called a story mapping experience. But basically, I want you to look back on your life and start to realize that moments to meaning is just X from quote. I do micro versus macro storytelling. Basically, I want you to look back on your life and recognize that the things that you have experienced are stories worth telling because you have validity in what you are an expert in. So you have like wise, valid experience, right?
Yeah.
So from that, I learned hope. From that, I learned, and I have a word bank on my website. Like all of this is there if you want to see my course, all the things. It's so you can kind of start to find that. So the first thing I would do is find 3 stories and give them meaning, conclude them. Say, I learned, I created, because of this, I know. I mean, so I would start there. And then one of those stories, if you're like, wow, this was really meaningful to me and this is a really big deal, and I think this is the story I want to tell, I would copy paste it into ChatGPT. And I would say, take this story and make it more concise and compelling and sound more human. Just see what happens. And then take that story and say, where would be a good place for this story to get told? And ask the robots. Let them help you.
Yeah.
And then the third thing would just be to decide to tell 2 people in your life. Like, hey, can I just tell you the story because it's meaningful to me?
Yeah.
And then just tell them. So kind of overcoming those initial hurdles is really huge. And then just recognizing that your story is not created for comparison. Like, literally no one is like you. So no one has been through the shit you've been through in the exact same way. Yeah. Your story is valuable and there's somebody very specific that you can help. So
yeah, I love that. Oh, this is so fun. Let's do this again.
Let's talk all the time. I'll call you later. Pues so me after.
Well, yep. Get the gas.
For sure.
Okay, Katie, where can people find you and who do you work with? I know you mentioned your course and we'll put it all in the show notes, but tell us all the deets.
My name is Katie Quesada, Quesada, Katie, traditional, Katie, Katie. And my website and my Instagram, everything is that. It's just clean, katiequesada.com, Katie Quesada Instagram. And then on my website, you'll see that I have a course called Story School, and that is your first big deep dive into your personal storytelling, 15 modules. It's the whole kit and caboodle. It'll walk you through how to find your stories, how to craft them, how to create them, and then where to tell them. So that's Story School. And then I do one-on-one individual high-level coaching, and then I work with teams and do consulting. So if you work with a brand, if you're a part of a team or a brand and you're like, oh, we should get better at our internal communication skills.
We all do. Yeah.
Call me.
Yes. Yes. At this point, you should see couples. So
exactly.
Learn how to communicate. So good. Katie, thank you so much for being on. I always love to see you. We went for a walk this morning. This just feels like such a special time. And Thank you so much. Oh,
I love you.
And coming up is the storytelling podcast with Katie Quesada.
I am going to launch a podcast. It's going to be called Story School with Katie Quesada.
Cool. There it is. Yes.
Podcast coming fall 2024. Whenever this airs. It will be there
happening.
out in the world, and you can't wait for the episode with the incredible Jen Hershey. You guys heard of her?
I know. I love it. All right. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon. Thank you for listening to our show. If you're interested in getting Katie's storytelling course, she gave our listeners $100 off. So make sure to head to our show notes to get that discount. And as always, thank you so much for your open ears, minds, and hearts, and we'll see you next time.